Oregon's 2024 recruiting class is off to quite the sizzling start, currently top 10 in the country, and it might be getting better really soon. Here we go.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. If you haven't already, like, comment, subscribe, please and thank you wherever you listen to or watch this show. Today, I've got my man, Max Torres. He's the host of the Ducks Dish podcast. He covers Oregon for Fan Nation at Sports Illustrated, editor and publisher of Ducks Digest. My man is out there all the time. You all probably know him by now. Max, how are we doing? Are we ready? And most importantly, is Michael Van Buren going to be an Oregon Duck one day?
I'm doing well, Spencer. Stoked to be back on with you. You know, some people think this is the dead season, but recruiting's ramping up, and I'm here for all of it, trying to make my way to a bunch of showcases this week out here in Southern California, see some top Oregon targets. Yeah, it's a fun time, but busy for sure. And, Van Buren's a guy that I think we should talk about on this episode.
Yeah, we will talk about him. Another recent commit for the Ducks, a blue chipper in the 2024 cycle, highest rated recruit to this point. I doubt it stays that way because things are looking up on the recruiting front. But let's talk about Van Buren first. Oregon's already got a quarterback commit in the 2024 cycle, that of course being Luke Moga, the 3-star, who has got some real upside, is a little bit raw in some sense, but Van Buren, a guy who is a pretty highly sought after recruit, and Oregon has long been going after him. And we've discussed here on the show before, Max, the prospect of taking two quarterbacks in the 2024 recruiting cycle, and things are appearing to trend in that direction. What are you hearing?
Yeah, so Van Buren's probably the biggest name right now in terms of, guys that Oregon's in a really good spot with, and someone that you have like a lot of tangible recruiting momentum with. Just to kind of get people up to speed, he was on campus again for the second time in April for that spring game to see Dan Lanning and the Ducks again, and then compete in the Elite 11 regional in Eugene the next day, which he tore up. Really good results, especially in the pro day. But as far as what I'm hearing with Van Buren, it's more positive things, and that the Ducks are in a really good spot. I think kind of the big piece that I'm latching onto right now is it seems like I'm hearing that there's some flexibility in that commitment date, which was previously set for July 8th. And then you kind of parlay that with how the Ducks are picking up some momentum here. Recently got Luke Moga, Casey Kelly, and then Iffy Obodegu, who we're going to talk about a little bit, I think. Don't want to spoil things too much, but Oregon's in a really good spot. He's spoken publicly about how he really likes Will Stein and that they have a good relationship. He's not afraid to compete, playing for one of the best programs in the country that plays a national schedule every year. That's kind of what you would expect to hear. But I think that it really looks like all the dominoes are kind of falling into place. All the pieces are falling into place for the Ducks to land Van Buren, which is why I put my prediction in for that yesterday, depending on when this comes out. So I got a podcast of my own that you can listen to on that. And then I also have the story, of course, over on Ducks Digest.
Who are the schools that are also going after Van Buren? He's an East Coast kid, so are there schools in that footprint that are chasing him?
Yeah, absolutely. So he's working from a top 3 right now. You got Oregon, the home state, Maryland Terrapins. Is that how you say that?
Yep.
How you say their mascot?
The Terrapins. I think they go by the Terps.
Yeah,
they're
Terps.
They're turtles.
They're turtles. So
it's a cooler way to say turtles.
Exactly. So you got Oregon, Maryland, and then you also have Penn State, which was really, Spencer, the long-viewed leader for quite a while until this past month. 2 trips out to Eugene across the country, not easy trips to make, which I kind of think you have to apply a little bit more weight for in a recruitment. And that seems like it's really kind of shifted things into Oregon's favor. And then also adding on to that, Penn State recently offered another 2024 quarterback out of Florida. I'm blanking on his name right this second, but I know he's from Winter Garden. So you would kind of think, what does that say about Penn State and how they kind of view their chances if they're maybe pivoting or at least preparing for a situation in which they don't land Van Buren. So that's kind of the latest as far as other schools. And then, the Mike Loxley and the Terps, you have that home state element, close to home, depending on where actually, now I'm thinking about Washington, D.C., but yeah, you have Mike Loxley and the Terps as the in-state school, and, got Under Armour, and, they probably have had the worst seasons of the schools recruiting him, at least of late.
Well, I'm on board, by the way, with Oregon taking a second quarterback in the 2024 cycle. I don't think that's at all an indictment of Luke Moga, because guys can operate on different timelines. You have to think big picture. Like, you want to be able to go to these kids and make legitimate promises about you're going to have a chance to compete for the starting quarterback job here one day. But you also have to be honest about the fact that, look, one of them could end up transferring, or Ty Thompson could transfer, or Austin Novosad could transfer in the future. You don't really know with this sort of stuff, but I think having more talented guys in that room is certainly better than having fewer, which applies to recruiting big picture as well. And Oregon has now landed their highest rated recruit in the 2024 class, Iffy Obodegu. And there are a couple notable things here, Max. He's a cornerback, and he comes from, wait for it, the same high school as Michael Van Buren. How much do you sense that is, contributing to the confidence that you feel with regards to Van Buren maybe choosing the Ducks?
Yeah, I think it plays a role. I'm going to be honest, I don't think it plays a major role, but it's just another part of, the pieces to the puzzle kind of coming together here, because one of the questions I like to ask recruits when I'm talking to these guys is, what's the difference when you're getting recruited by another high school player versus a coach? And, some of the things I'll hear is, it's a much more formal approach from a coach. They might be telling you what you want to hear. And, not every coach is genuine in recruiting. It's a very no exact science, as I like to say. But if you have a guy who you are familiar with on a daily basis, someone you've gone to battle with, even if he's on the other side of the ball, he's gonna give you the real. He's gonna tell you what his experience was. I'm pretty sure they've taken a visit to Oregon together at some point, because Van Buren's been a repeat visitor. But he's just going to be able to kind of say, this is the pieces that we have in place right now in this class. You can be a big part of that. This is why I committed. This is why I felt like it was the right spot for me. This is why my family felt like it was the right spot for me. And then another part of it with them being teammates is it kind of gives you a piece of home, right? Or, another additional element that can give you some comfort being a cross-country commit, because like we've said, those are not easy pulls to get all the way out in Western Oregon and Eugene. And I likened it to a similar example with two Baltimore area guys just a couple cycles ago. Dante Thornton, a wide receiver out of Baltimore, and then Damon David, a safety out of the Baltimore area. Dante was in the fold early. They talked about being really, really close, best friends. Dante's obviously gone now, but I think that played part of the role into why Damon wanted to hop into the fold, because it was just another box that Oregon checked. So kind of giving some background there in terms of how I think Obodegu's commitment could further solidify Oregon's chances here with Michael Van Buren.
Yeah, Alabama was one of the schools after Obodegu, kind of in the running there at the end. Oregon emerges victorious in that particular recruitment at this point in time. And I think Demetrius Martin just continues to show not just that he's a good coach, but a great recruiter on staff for Dan Lanning and company, who are really shooting for the stars, literally and metaphorically, in the 2024 cycle. And we're going to talk about just how high this recruiting class could go, because it's looking really, really good, and it's still early in the cycle. It's looking almost as good as Built Bar's taste. Yeah, see what I did there? I tricked you once again. They're the best tasting protein bar ever. You've got to try them. Built Bars are healthy. They taste amazing. They're covered in 100% real dark chocolate. That's right, real chocolate. They come in unbelievably great flavors. I'm a mint brownie guy myself, but they've got churro, peanut butter brownie, cookies and cream, everything you need in a protein bar. 17 grams of protein, only 4 grams of sugar, and 130 calories. They've got it all. You can go to built.com, get your specialty flavors there, But you can go to your local Walmart, get a box of 4 of cookies and cream in the pharmacy section, or go to Sam's Club, get a 13-bar box with hit flavors, brownie batter puff and churro puff. Whichever way you choose to get your next order of Built Bars, go check them out, and you can thank me later. All right, Max. So this 2024 class for the Ducks is off to, what should we say, a great start, a sizzling start, a hot start, a fantastic start. Like everything is trending up on the recruiting front. And, Van Buren could be coming. And there's still, so many guys whose timelines are more prolonged than the guys who have verbally committed to this point, of course. But Oregon doesn't yet have a 5-star in this 2024 class, and it's still sitting top 10 nationally. We've talked about how many big-time 5-star recruits they had at the spring game or just before, Elijah Rushing and Brandon Baker and go down the list. Dan Lanning and this staff have shown their recruiting chops, but it feels like with this 2024 class, 2023 was excellent, by the way. If you're just talking about the high school class, and the portal matters as well, but it was a top 10 class in 2023, ranked number 9 nationally when compared to everywhere else, everybody else rather, including the transfer portal rank. They finished 9th overall. Right now, the 2024 cycle is sitting at 7th overall. Of course, there's still a long way to go, and you still have transfers to factor in, but it really feels like top 10 is looking like the floor for this recruiting class. That's how it feels right now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to do a show just talking about the overall approach by Dan Lanning and why I think the more that I cover this team, the more that I talk to recruits, talk to sources, I think this is going to go down as Oregon's best class in program history. I really do. I really do. And you think about that, there's still a lot of time to go, but look at where they're at already. Number 7 with only 11 commits. You're looking at, the big picture nationally, and they're averaging an average rating of 90.99, which is well in 4-star territory. So they're just going after some huge names. I think that it's just really falling into place in terms of a timing perspective. All that said, there are some guys that are going to kind of draw things out a little bit more, like a Brandon Baker, who I talked to last week. He's looking at more of a December timeline, and he's trying to kind of figure out his official visits. So I think that the approach from Lanning and the staff has really paid off. They got in early on a lot of guys. I really like how they've used their visits, getting some of those unofficial visits earlier in a recruitment. And then as they're getting closer to a decision timeline, or a decision rather, then you try to come in and get that last official visit so you can make that last impression and that lasting impression before they go to, put on that hat of wherever they're going to be playing their college football. So you also have a national footprint. You have guys from all over the country. You have some guys in your state, and in AJ Pugliano and Trent Ferguson, have some studs out of Southern California with Jordan Anderson being the main guy there. And then you also go across the country out to Baltimore with Obodegu, and then up to the Northeast with Tysier Denmark out of Philly. So I think that that's just really building the momentum and the hype around this class. And it looks like June 23rd is probably shaping up to be one of their big official visit weekends in the month of June. Keeping in mind, Spencer, that July is a dead period. So that's why some of these visits between now, we're seeing guys starting to take official visits now here, even in the spring. And then between now and the end of June are going to be so pivotal. And you're seeing some big time guys like Dylan Williams, who I just talked to yesterday at Long Beach Poly. He's one of their top linebacker targets. He's going to be on campus for an official visit in June. Dakota Fields out of Gardena Serra, a top corner target for Demetrius Martin. He's going to be on campus in June. So I think they're just really, really being very, strategic in their approach. And I think they're doing all the right things right now.
And geographically, you look at the reach that this staff has clearly got the capability of going to. And it's encouraging when you talk about the upside of what the recruiting potential really is across the board, right? Obviously, Dan Lanning's at the center of it, but it's about position coaches. It's about, coordinators. Will Stein is a quarterback coach. Yeah, he's going to be the biggest guy that's involved with Michael Van Buren's recruitment, probably more than Dan Lanning, frankly. Demetrius Martin is going after all these defensive backs, and Tosh Lupoy is big on the defensive line. We saw that in the 2023 cycle with guys like Johnny Bowens and Amari Washington and Ashton Porter, and just keep going up and down the list and whatnot. But Oregon with 11 commits so far in the 2024 cycle, 8 of them are 4-star guys, and 3 of them are 3-star guys. And I think that's just a testament to the standard that they have set and want to continue to set on the recruiting trail, that they feel that they can go anywhere in the country, get a player that they want to come and play for the Ducks. And it doesn't really matter where they're at, because you've got states ranging from Oregon, Washington, California, and Arizona to, Texas, Maryland, and Pennsylvania out here. So I think that that's a testament, not just to the brand that Oregon's established on the recruiting trail, but also the commitment that these coaches have to making recruiting a big priority for the program.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. And we've seen previous Oregon staffs take that national approach, and Dan Lanning's picking right up where they left off. I think, one more guy that is 2 guys actually that are worth a quick mention. Is this show coming out Thursday, Friday?
Thursday show.
Thursday show. Okay. So we're heading into the weekend, at that point, Friday Junior. And 2 guys you got to keep an eye on. You got Gary Bryant Jr., the wide receiver transfer from USC. He's supposed to be announcing his decision on Saturday, May 13th. And I really love where the Ducks are at there. So don't be surprised if Gary Bryant Jr. ends up a Duck. We'll have to see, though. And then another name that is kind of picking up some steam with Oregon of late is offensive lineman Jacon McCroy out of Pinson, Alabama, Clay Chalkville High School. Pinson is a notable city for a couple reasons. Bo Nix is from there. Tez Johnson played out there with Bo Nix as well. And then just the state of Alabama, you also have 5-star edge rusher Jordan Ross, who I think the Ducks are in phenomenal shape for after an awesome spring game visit that saw him spending a lot of time with Jurion Dickey and the rest of those coaches. So, I got to do some more digging on McCroy, but he's another big national name, 4-star guy just outside the top 10 at his position and a top 10 guy in the state of Alabama. So, another name that you got to watch there as Alik Terry, assembles his first offensive line class as the offensive line coach out there in Eugene.
Let's shift off recruiting for the last bit of the show here. I wanted to ask you about something I discussed on the pod yesterday with regards to Oregon's defense, because recruiting is all great and fine, but at some point you do want it to translate to on-field results. That's kind of how this wonderful marriage between recruiting and football work out in an ideal world as a sports fan, of course. But last year, Oregon's defense was basically 75th-ish nationally. It depends on which metric you look at, but they were in the 70s in points, yards, and passing yards allowed per game. They were much better against the run. They were terrible on third down. The only schools, someone had asked about sacks the other day, the only schools that had fewer sacks in the conference than Oregon a year ago all had losing records: Arizona, Colorado, and Arizona State. And all 3, by the way, had horrific defenses. So when you look at the Ducks and the players they've added, Jordan Birch and Kyrie Jackson, Evan Williams, Tyshim Johnson, Justin Jacobs, the guy Mateo Uyungule, all the newcomers who figure to have an impact at some level or another. And based on what we saw in the spring game, looks like the defense has a chance to be better, particularly up front along the defensive line. What are your kind of goals and expectations for Oregon in terms of where you think they need to rank nationally, or what sorts of numbers they need to put up in 2023 to be an improved unit to the point where Oregon can return to the Pac-12 championship game in a loaded, offensively driven Pac-12?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And you definitely want to see statistical improvements across the board. I think just about, I think Oregon's run defense was great, but it also kind of, failed them when it mattered most. And, looking at that Oregon State game, obviously, right? But I think you obviously want to see, I don't know, there's certain markers that I have in mind. I mean, where they were at last year was definitely not acceptable. So I think, at least in the Pac-12, you want to be maybe like top 3 in sacks is something I would throw out there, because I mean, they're very well positioned to have probably the best D line in the pack. I don't think that's unrealistic, but it's worth mentioning. USC added some good pieces in Bear Alexander.
I was going to say
Anthony
USC added
Lucas.
Bear Alexander, and then the guy from Texas A&M whose name is eluding me right
Anthony
now.
Lucas.
Yeah, Anthony Lucas. Those are big time additions up there on the front line, and USC was a great set. And by the way, it's not just about sacks though. USC was second in the conference in sacks last year, and their defense stunk. So it's a component where Oregon needs to improve, but it's certainly not the be all end all for whether or not you have a good defense.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I mean, just to kind of continue on some of those areas, I think you got to generate more takeaways. I think last year was entirely too reliant on Christian Gonzalez. I mean, that wasn't the approach, but when it came to takeaways, he was usually the guy doing it, right? You had Mace Funa with that pick 6 against Wazoo, but they weren't generating that many turnovers. And I think especially with the talent that they've added to the roster, the overall talent on the roster, and the comfortability with the scheme, from year 1 to year 2 under Lanning and Lapoy, I think that, there's understandably, greater expectations, as there should be. And I also think that you have to look at defending the run needs to continue to be, a hallmark of this defense. And then, just even if we're not talking about sacks overall, I think you just need more pressure and more havoc. The havoc rate is something that I think is an important stat to look at, because sacks don't always tell the whole story, but that was a huge part of the story last year. So I think those are some of the markers. Third down conversion, you definitely need to get better there. And then I also think, maybe I don't even know where they ranked in this one because it's so hard to track, but there were a lot of missed tackles last year, Spencer. So, things were looking a little bit better in the spring game, but again, you can't draw too much from that. I really liked what I saw from Jamal Hill. Like we talked on your show, I think, about that open field tackle on Bucky, which is not easy to do.
Yeah.
So it looks like just with guys being in the right place and looking more comfortable and flying to the ball, that should be an area we expect improvement in. But, we got a lot of time between now and that season opener against Portland State. And then the more notable game where we'll kind of get a better litmus test against Texas Tech in week 2.
Yeah, I agree that you can have takeaways after the Portland State game, but the Texas Tech game will be kind of the most telling with regards to how we're feeling, because Texas Tech, a solid Big 12 team, right? Like above average. They were an 8-win team a year ago, beat Ole Miss in their bowl game, and had a really, really nice season. You're playing them at Lubbock. Like if your defense can play well out there against former Oregon quarterback Tyler Shuck, who's, a respectable, serviceable starter, but nothing special. Like I'll be concerned if Shuck goes out and torches us for 350 yards, even if we win the game. If he, I've seen what he's capable of, and I've also seen what he's not capable of. And if he goes out and dominates you through the air and you win the game, 38-34 or whatever, I would come away saying that's not a great place for the defense to be, because that's a guy who I think you should be able to hold, under 250 yards through the air, because he's, again, a good, solid, serviceable Power 5 quarterback, but he's not exactly Caleb Williams or Michael Penix out there. A couple of stats before I pivot to my last question for you today here, Max. Oregon allowed 27.5 points per game last year, 380 yards per game, and they recorded 18 sacks. And those numbers were ninth in the Pac-12 in sacks. Their points per game, they were actually fifth, but I'd like to see them, maybe move that under 25 points a game. And then yards per, they were, I believe, seventh in the conference. The Pac-12 stats sadly don't let me organize it by whatever stat I'm looking for here. But I think, benchmarks for real tangible progress, get under 25 points a game, especially given your schedule, right? You don't have a Georgia on there who's going to, inflate your numbers a little bit. Like your non-conference games are a good but inferior overall program in Texas Tech, a team that's capable of beating you for sure. But is Texas Tech football as consistently good as Oregon? No. Like you should be favored in that game. Portland State and Hawaii, those should be dominant defensive outings. And then you have Arizona State on the schedule. They're rebuilding. Colorado rebuilding. Stanford rebuilding. Cal, never that great, though they might be better at quarterback or whatnot. I feel like under 25 points a game, get under 350 yards allowed per game. Just bring it closer down to 300 and have at least Gosh, I'd say at least 25 sacks, but really in the 30 range is kind of what I'm shooting for those particular numbers. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think all those are pretty reasonable. I mean, yeah, you said 25 points a game, under 25 points a game.
Yeah, that's where I like to see them go to. And rushing yards allowed per game, they were 125 last year. That was 4th in the Pac-12. You replicate that success, you're doing great.
Yeah, no, I think those are good. I mean, and when we talk about under 25, I think we can both agree that it'd be healthier to be closer to 20 than 24, I guess.
Yeah.
Just given the talent again that they have. And I think that it's probably worth, it's fair to say that, the expectations are higher for the defense than the offense, heading into 2023, even though the offense I think is going to be pretty darn good with the pieces that are coming back, most notably Bo Nix. But I think there's definitely more pressure on Lanning and Tosh Lupoi than there is on Will Stein, just because we've seen that the floor of the Oregon offense, at least under Dan Lanning, since he got hired, is higher than the defense. And the defense is entering a prove-it year, no doubt about it. All that to say, we have to give them a shout out, I think, for that game against Utah, because I think that was one game last year where you can say without a doubt the defense won that game.
Yes,
but
they did.
You need to be able to go into the next season with your defense being able to put up points for you, generating turnovers, start drives in great field position, and be a difference maker and not be a liability. Which is that too harsh to say for Oregon last year that the defense was a liability? I don't know.
I don't know about liability. I would say that they
just not a difference maker.
Yeah, they didn't instill confidence. Like, I'm a Seahawks fan, and when the Legion of Boom was rolling, every time a punt or a kickoff team had the other team inside the 20 or 25 yard line, I felt confident that it was going to be a stop. Like, Oregon was going to get the ball back, or the Seahawks were going to get the ball back and not allow any points. And that's where, I feel like Oregon's defense just hasn't been since 2019. By the way, quick trivia before we end with one final question today, Max. In 2019, which I always refer to as Oregon's last great defense, and the numbers certainly bear that out. Do you know how many points per game Oregon's defense allowed in 2019?
Oh, I don't, but I want to try to guess. So give me just a second here because you're putting me on the spot. So I'm going to try to just think out loud here. You said under 25 would be a healthier number for Oregon. I'm trying to think back to the 2019 season. You had KT, you had Troy Dye, and the secondary was really good with Javon
Secondary
Holland.
was loaded. Javon Holland, Ron McKinley, Brady Breeze, Diamondor Lenore, Thomas Graham.
Okay, and Mikael Wright.
And a true freshman, Mikael Wright, yep.
Which was probably his best season at Oregon, we might add. Okay, all that, I'm just buying myself time. I'm going to go with, how about 22?
Lower.
Really? Okay.
15.7.
Oh my God. Wow, I was way off. No, yeah, I mean, that just goes to your point. Like, I feel like I'd be curious to see how much Lanning and this defensive staff are drawing back to that year, because notably different roster makeup, particularly maybe at defensive back. But I'm really curious. Like, that's like, if I could talk to Lanning and this, defensive staff, it's like, hey, you look at 2019, how is their approach similar to your approach? How is it different? You had a guy like KT who didn't really even start until the back half of the season. Versus you're going in with Jordan Birch, who should be a starter for you, no doubt there. So I just be curious what the similarities and carryover are in that between those two seasons.
I think that's something we might have to explore in a future episode of the show. But yeah, when you look at what Oregon's defense has been since then, 2020 lost Andy Avalos, defense allows 28 points per game. Now, it was a weird season, so okay, chalk it up to that. 25 and a half in 2021, and then it actually took a step back a bit, 27.4. Now I think the Georgia game is inflating that, of course, but it means that Oregon's defense wasn't ready to be at that sort of level at that point in time. So that's where I think the ceiling kind of is defensively, is you can allow less than 20 points a game. I think it's harder now because offenses are so darn good. But the thing I wanted to ask you to wrap up today's show, Max, was a question that came in. I also talked about on yesterday's show. Besides the obvious rivalry games with Oregon State and Washington, what is the one game that would give you the greatest sense of satisfaction or excitement if it ended in a blowout Oregon victory?
All right, I'm going to give you two answers because I think the first one's really obvious, and that's USC. I know that Oregon fans would, and
It was not
probably,
obvious to me yesterday when I was answering the question. Like, I thought about it and I came
oh,
in and I was saying Texas Tech. And then as I was answering, I was like, wait a minute, USC's on the schedule. The answer's USC.
yeah. So I feel like that's like probably the most popular answer because, you can send them out of the Pac-12 with a loss. Maybe at that point in the season, you're in, early to mid-November, maybe you can shake up the Pac-12 title game picture and maybe keep them out of that possibly. So I know Oregon fans want the Trojans to leave the Pac-12 with a sour taste in their mouth. So that's why I think that one's the easiest one to say. But I kind of feel like I want to go Utah here with this one. They're back-to-back Pac-12 champions. The Ducks won last year, but it was a really close game, awesome game. They're feeling confident out there in Salt Lake City. I think that they're a team that's quietly gaining ground on the recruiting trail, not with the likes of Oregon from a ranking standpoint, but Kyle Whittingham's always been a guy that does more with less. But I think they're kind of starting to figure things out now, and they just get the right kind of guy. So I think that they could definitely be one of the more dangerous teams in the Pac-12, alongside Oregon and Washington once USC and UCLA leave. And that game's in Salt Lake City. Just think of if you can blow out Salt Lake, or you can blow out Utah in Rice-Eccles Stadium. Like that would be such a huge statement because Oregon hasn't been a team that's been awesome on the road. I think they kind of got over that a little bit last year. But I think I'm going to go with Utah as the game that I would most like to see a blowout in Oregon's favor.
I think it'd be mighty impressive. Nobody's beaten Rice-Eccles when it's or beaten Utah at Rice-Eccles Stadium when it's at full capacity, I believe, since 2018. It has been a long time since when they're able to put fans in that stadium, which they have been for, of course, a while now. It has been a long time since anybody's won in there. I would take a victory no matter how it came, but I'm with you that it would be mighty fun to see it go that way. Max Torres is the host of the Ducks Dish podcast. He covers Oregon for Fan Nation at Sports Illustrated. He's the editor and publisher of Ducks Digest. My man is everywhere. He's on this show all the time. Max, appreciate the collaboration as always, my man.
Appreciate you, Spencer. Thanks for having me on. I gotta bring you. Maybe I'll bring you on my show this week, depending on what your schedule is looking like. But we can talk about that off air. But nah, man, it's always love. Appreciate you having me on, and appreciate all the Duck fans for tuning in, and the continued support on my end. It's greatly appreciated.
Yeah, you're the man, Max. Appreciate everyone listening. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.